The car was still running when they found it, headlights cutting through the November fog like two pale eyes staring at nothing. The driver's door hung open, the radio played softly, some soul tune from a Montgomery station fading in and out with static. But Rebecca Carter was gone. If you're drawn to cases where the truth hides in plain sight for decades, stay with me, because this story will take us places nobody in Montgomery, Alabama ever expected to go. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single moment of this chilling true crime investigation. November 16th, 1968. A Saturday night in Montgomery, Alabama. The kind of autumn evening when the air hangs heavy with wood smoke and the promise of winter. When small-town folks gather close, when secrets stay buried deep, and when a young woman named Rebecca Carter drove her powder-blue Chevrolet Bel Air down a country road for the very last time. Rebecca was 24 years old, a schoolteacher at Montgomery Elementary, the kind of woman who wore her dark hair pinned neatly even on weekends, who played piano at First Baptist every Sunday, who kept a jar of peppermints in her desk for children who needed a little extra kindness. That night, she'd been at the Jenkins farm, celebrating the end of harvest season with her church community. Picture it with me, gospel music drifting from the porch, sweet tea in mason jars catching the light from paper lanterns, men playing dominoes in the barn while children ran barefoot through fields until their mothers called them in. Rebecca arrived around 7 p.m. in that powder-blue 1964 Chevrolet Bel Air, the car her father had bought her when she landed the teaching position, a gift he'd give her just months before he and Rebecca's mother died in a crash that left her and her younger sister Dorothy alone in the world. She wore a yellow cardigan that night, Dorothy Carter would later tell investigators, her voice barely above a whisper. Over a floral dress, nothing special, just Rebecca being Rebecca. Friends remembered her laughing, dancing to a few records, helping Mrs. Jenkins clear dishes around 10's Grand. Normal moments that would later be dissected for clues, for warnings, for anything that might explain what happened next. Rebecca left just before 11:20. Several people saw her walk toward her car, waving goodbyes, promising to see them at church the next morning. The Chevy's taillights disappeared down the gravel road that wound through cotton fields and pine stands toward town, 3 miles east. Back home on Oakwood Avenue, Dorothy waited up. Since their parents' death 3 years earlier, the sisters had shared the small white house they'd grown up in. Dorothy, just 21 and working at the local library, had skipped the Jenkins gathering with a headache. "I wasn't worried at first," Dorothy would later say, twisting her hands in her lap as Deputy Frank Moore took notes. Sometimes Becca stopped at the all-night diner on Highway 231. She'd meet other teachers there for coffee, talk about school things. But when 1 a.m. came and went, Dorothy called the sheriff's office. Deputy Frank Moore was 29 years old in 1968, a Vietnam veteran with 2 years on the force, the kind of lawman who still believed in the fundamental goodness of people, despite everything he'd seen overseas. "Dispatch called me around 1:15, Moore would later recall. Said we had a missing person. Young woman hadn't come home from a church social. I remember thinking it was probably nothing. Maybe she'd met a fellow, maybe she'd gotten a flat tire." Moore retraced Rebecca's route from the Jenkins farm. The night was unusually foggy for November, visibility down to just a few yards in places. His cruiser's headlights barely cut through the mist as he drove slowly along the county road, scanning the shoulders. At 1:45 a.m., his headlights caught something pale through the fog. The Chevrolet Bel Air sat on the shoulder near an old service road that cut through the pines. The engine was running, headlights on, driver's door open wide. Moore approached cautiously, hand on his holster. The radio played softly, Aretha Franklin fading in and out with static. Rebecca's purse sat on the passenger seat, wallet inside with $12 and her driver's license. Her keys dangled from the ignition. A half-empty Coca-Cola bottle stood in the cup holder, still cold to the touch. "Rebecca," Moore called, his voice swallowed by the fog. "Miss Carter, you out here?" He circled the vehicle with his flashlight, the beam catching nothing but empty fields and tree shadows. No blood, no torn fabric, no signs of struggle. Just an abandoned car with its motor running, its owner vanished into the Alabama night like smoke. By dawn, Sheriff Thomas Walsh had assembled volunteers from across the county. Men in work boots, women in church dresses, college students from Auburn driving in to help. They searched the woods, the ditches, and the old barns that dotted the farmland. Around 6 a.m., one of the searchers, a 16-year-old boy named Jimmy Larson, found a single black shoe lying in the grass 15 feet from the car. Rebecca's left flat. They never found its match. News spread fast. By Sunday morning, half the town of Montgomery seemed to be out searching. Rebecca wasn't just another missing person. She taught their children, organized summer reading programs at the library, delivered meals to shut-ins after church. Good people knew her, Sheriff Walsh told the Montgomery Advertiser. Good families trusted her. This isn't some drifter or troublemaker we're talking about. This is Rebecca Carter. Over the next few days, investigators pieced together her final hours. Witnesses remembered her leaving the party alone, calm, smiling. A farmer claimed he'd seen her car pulled over near the county line with another vehicle parked behind it. A dark pickup, maybe blue or green. I didn't think nothing of it, the farmer, Harold Gentry, told investigators. Thought maybe she was having car trouble. Would have stopped myself if I hadn't been running late for my sister's birthday dinner. Another witness, Marlene Davis, a waitress heading home from her shift at the highway diner, swore she saw Rebecca driving alone on Highway 231 around 10:45, hands on the wheel, eyes forward. She looked fine to me, Davis insisted. Just driving normal, nothing strange about it. Every account conflicted with the others. No one could say exactly when or how she vanished. 3 days after Rebecca's disappearance, Detective James Harrison arrived from the state police. 42 years old with salt and pepper hair and eyes that had seen too much, Harrison specialized in missing persons cases. The first 48 hours are critical, Harrison told Sheriff Walsh as they stood beside Rebecca's Chevrolet, now impounded at the county garage. And we've already lost those. Harrison began by interviewing Dorothy again. The younger Carter sister sat in their family living room, surrounded by photographs of happier times. Rebecca's college graduation, their parents' 20th anniversary, summers at Lake Martin. Did your sister have any enemies? Harrison asked, notebook open on his knee. Dorothy shook her head. Everyone loved Becca. Any romantic interests? Someone who might have been jealous? She dated a few boys in college. Nothing serious lately. She said teaching took all her energy. Any unusual behavior in the weeks before she disappeared? Phone calls she wouldn't explain, letters that upset her. Dorothy hesitated just long enough for Harrison to notice. There was one thing, she finally said. About 2 weeks ago, I came home from work early with a migraine. Becca was on the phone in the kitchen. When she saw me, she hung up real quick, looked, I don't know, flustered maybe. Did you ask her about it? She said it was just a parent from school, but Becca was always honest with me. Always. That was the only time I ever felt like she wasn't telling me something. Harrison made a note. Anything else unusual? Changes in routine? New friends? Dorothy twisted the handkerchief in her lap. She'd been going for drives in the evenings, said she needed to clear her head, and she'd been writing in her journal more than usual. Harrison looked up sharply. Journal? Do you have it? That's just it, Dorothy said, tears filling her eyes. I can't find it anywhere. It's not in her room, not in her desk at school. It's like it disappeared with her. As days turned into weeks, the case grew colder. The search parties dwindled. The newspaper articles moved from the front page to small updates buried between advertisements. Life in Montgomery began to resume its normal rhythm, though people now locked their doors at night and fathers escorted their daughters even to church functions. Rumors spread about drifters passing through town, about jealous lovers, about the dark stretch of road locals began calling Rebecca's Mile. Theories surfaced, faded, and died. Harrison remained, taking a room at the Montgomery Motor Lodge, his wall covered with photographs, timelines, and maps. He interviewed everyone who had been at the Jenkins farm that night. He traced Rebecca's movements in the weeks before her disappearance. He developed a particular interest in the Caldwell family. Wealthy landowners with political connections, whose son Henry had been seen talking with Rebecca at church events. But nothing solid emerged. No body, no confession, no clear motive. By Christmas, even Harrison had to admit defeat. He packed his notes, promised Dorothy he wouldn't forget her sister, and returned to the state capital. The winter of 1968 gave way to spring. Rebecca's classroom at Montgomery Elementary welcomed a new teacher. Dorothy sold the family home and moved to Birmingham, unable to bear the weight of empty rooms and whispered sympathy. The case of Rebecca Carter became just another unsolved mystery in county records. Another ghost story told by teenagers parked along dark country roads, until 5 years later, October 12, 1973. A hunter named Marcus Wheeler was tracking a wounded deer through the pine woods less than 2 miles from where Rebecca's car had been found. The deer led him to a clearing he'd never noticed before, where the ground dipped slightly beneath a stand of young pines. Wheeler's dog began digging frantically at the soft earth. Thinking the animal had found the deer's trail, Wheeler approached. What the dog uncovered wasn't a deer. It was a bone. Human. Small. A finger, perhaps. By nightfall, state police had cordoned off the area. By morning, they had carefully excavated skeletal remains buried shallow beneath pine roots. The coroner confirmed they belonged to a young woman, mid-20s. Dental records suggested what the town had long feared. It was Rebecca Carter. The cause of death was never determined. No arrests were made. But Detective James Harrison, now with streaks of white in his hair and lines etched deeper around his eyes, returned to Montgomery County. And this time he wasn't leaving until he uncovered the truth. What happened to Rebecca Carter on that foggy November night? Who stopped her car on that lonely stretch of road? Why did it take 5 years for her remains to be discovered? And what secrets died with her in those pine woods? If you're intrigued by this mystery from the heart of Alabama, subscribe to Dark Country Chronicles now. In our next episode, we'll follow Detective Harrison as he reopens the case, uncovers shocking connections to powerful Montgomery families, and discovers that Rebecca's journal may hold the key to everything. Some secrets refuse to stay buried. Some truths demand to be told, and Rebecca Carter's story is just beginning. 5 years is a long time to wait for answers. 5 years of empty chairs at Christmas dinner. 5 years of birthdays never celebrated. 5 years of Dorothy Carter waking up each morning wondering if today would be the day they found her sister. For Detective James Harrison, 5 years meant cold trails and fading memories. But the discovery of Rebecca Carter's remains changed everything. Some cases haunt you. Some victims refuse to be forgotten. And sometimes the dead have ways of speaking that the living cannot silence. Welcome back to Dark Country Chronicles, Montgomery, Alabama. October 1973. The skeletal remains found by hunter Marcus Wheeler had been positively identified as Rebecca Carter. What little evidence remained told a story of hasty burial and secrets meant to stay hidden beneath pine needles and Alabama clay. Detective Harrison stood at the edge of the clearing, watching forensic technicians sift through soil for any evidence that might have survived 5 years of rain and rot. His hair had more gray now, his shoulders a slight stoop that hadn't been there in '68. But his eyes, those remained sharp, observant, missing nothing. "We'll need to re-interview everyone," he told Sheriff Daniel Peterson, who'd been a deputy during the original investigation and now wore the badge his predecessor Thomas Walsh had passed down. Everyone who was at the Jenkins farm that night, everyone who knew her, everyone who might have seen something. Peterson shifted uncomfortably. "It's been 5 years, Harrison. People have moved on. Some have died. Some have left town." "And some," Harrison said, kneeling to examine a patch of disturbed earth, "have been keeping secrets all this time." Harrison's first stop wasn't the sheriff's office or Dorothy Carter's new address in Birmingham. Instead, he drove to Montgomery Elementary School, where Rebecca had taught 3rd grade. The building looked much the same. Red brick, wide windows, children's artwork taped to glass. A place where innocence was still possible. In the schoolyard, an elderly black man was raking leaves into neat piles. His movements were methodical, practiced, the rake extensions of his weathered hands "Excuse me," Harrison called. "I'm looking for information about Rebecca Carter." The man paused, leaning on his rake. "Miss Rebecca? Ain't nobody talked about her in years." His eyes narrowed. "You the detective from before, the one who gave up?" Harrison felt the sting but nodded. "James Harrison, and you are?" "Elijah Washington. Been groundskeeper here 30 years. He resumed raking. "They found her, didn't they? That's why you're back." "Yes. I'd like to ask you some questions, if you don't mind." Elijah's laugh held no humor. "Now you want to ask me questions? 5 years ago, nobody wanted to hear what the colored groundskeeper had to say about Miss Rebecca." Harrison stepped closer. "I'm asking now." Elijah studied him, measuring the man against some internal standard. Finally, he nodded toward a bench beneath an oak tree. "Miss Rebecca used to sit there during recess, said she liked watching the children play, said it reminded her that the world wasn't all bad." As they walked to the bench, Harrison asked, "Were you and Miss Carter friends?" "Much as a black man and a white woman could be friends in Alabama in 1968. Elijah sat, laying his rake across his knees. "She was kind, treated me like a person, not furniture. Brought me coffee sometimes, asked about my grandchildren." "Did you see her the day she disappeared?" "No, but I saw her that Thursday before. She was upset about something, crying in her classroom after the children left. I was mopping the halls, heard her through the door." Harrison leaned forward. "Did you speak to her?" "Knocked and asked if she was all right. She wiped her eyes, said she was fine. But then she said something strange. She said, 'Sometimes doing the right thing costs more than you expect to pay.' Next day, she brought me a book, said she thought I might like it." "What book?" "To Kill a Mockingbird." Said it was important to remember that standing up for what's right isn't always popular." Elijah's eyes met Harrison's. 2 days later, she was gone. Harrison made notes. "Did you tell the original investigators about this?" Elijah's expression hardened. "They didn't ask. And in 1968, offering information nobody asked for was a good way for a man like me to find trouble." What did Rebecca mean about doing the right thing? What moral stand had she taken that might have led to her disappearance? And why had investigators never bothered to interview the one person who saw her daily at school? These questions plagued Harrison as he drove to Birmingham the next day to meet Dorothy Carter. The younger sister had built a new life, teaching at a community college, engaged to a local accountant, living in a modern apartment complex far from the memories of Montgomery. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," Dorothy said, pouring coffee in a sunny kitchen that held no photographs of Rebecca or their parents. "When they found her, I thought that would be the end of it." "Finding her is just the beginning," Harrison replied. "I need to ask you about Rebecca's personal effects, things that might not have seemed important 5 years ago." Dorothy set down her cup. "Like what?" "Her journal. You mentioned she kept one." "I never found it. Not in the house, not in her classroom." "What about other hiding places? Did Rebecca have somewhere special she might have kept things she wanted to protect?" Dorothy stared out the window for a long moment. "There was. Our parents' house had a loose floorboard in the attic. We used to hide Christmas presents there as children, but I checked there after she disappeared. There was nothing. Would you mind if I looked again?" Dorothy's fingers tightened around her cup. "I sold the house years ago, the new owners. I can get a warrant if necessary, but it would be easier with your help." Something flickered in Dorothy's eyes. Fear. Resignation. "I'll call them. The Millers. They're a nice young couple. I'm sure they'll understand." As Harrison rose to leave, Dorothy caught his arm. "Detective, if you find out what happened to Becca, will it bring her back?" The question hung between them, impossible to answer truthfully without cruelty. "No," Harrison said gently, "but it might bring her justice." The Miller family had made changes to the Carter family home. New paint, modern furniture, a swing set in the backyard where Rebecca and Dorothy had once played hopscotch. But the attic remained largely untouched, used only for storage of Christmas decorations and outgrown baby clothes. Harrison knelt beside the window, tapping floorboards until he found one that sounded hollow. With Dorothy watching from the attic stairs, He pried it up with a pocket knife. The space beneath was empty at first glance, but when Harrison ran his fingers along the edges, he felt something. A small leather-bound book wedged against the joists, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Rebecca's journal. Dorothy gasped. "I checked there. I swear I did." Harrison didn't respond, carefully extracting the journal and opening its pages. Rebecca's neat handwriting filled entry after entry, mundane details of school days, church activities, books she'd read. But beginning in September 1968, 2 months before her disappearance, the entries changed, became cryptic, concerned. September 12, 1968, met with HC again today. He says his father would never agree. Says it would ruin everything they've built. I told him some things matter more than family reputation. September 20th, 1968, received another note in my school mailbox. "Stop pushing where you don't belong. Principal Matthews says he doesn't know who left it." I'm not sure I believe him. October 3rd, 1968, WS approached me after church, said he wanted to discuss my concerns privately. Something about him makes me uncomfortable, but he has the influence to help. October 17th, 1968. The meeting with WS was a mistake. He doesn't care about the children. He only cares about keeping things as they are. He said I was being unnecessarily provocative and should remember my place. November 1st, 1968. I can't keep this secret anymore. I have to tell someone. If anything happens to me, the letter is in the book. The final entry was dated November 15th, 1968, the day before Rebecca disappeared. Tomorrow night at the Jenkins Farm Social. WS will be there. He says he's reconsidered, wants to talk privately. I don't trust him, but what choice do I have? The school board meets Monday to discuss integration plans. This may be my only chance. Harrison looked up at Dorothy, whose face had gone pale. Did you know Rebecca was involved in school integration efforts? Dorothy shook her head. She never said... she believed in equality, but she never mentioned being actively involved. Who is WS? Harrison asked. I don't know. And HC? Dorothy hesitated. Could be Henry Caldwell. His family owns half the county. His father, Senator Caldwell, was on the school board back then. Harrison flipped through the journal again. She mentioned a letter hidden in a book. Any idea which one? Becca had hundreds of books. One that would be significant, one connected to what she was fighting for. Understanding dawned in Dorothy's eyes. To kill a mockingbird. Did you catch that? The same book Rebecca had given to Elijah Washington days before her disappearance. The pieces were beginning to connect, forming a picture darker than Harrison had imagined. But the book wasn't among Rebecca's possessions that Dorothy had kept. It wasn't in her old classroom at Montgomery Elementary. It wasn't anywhere obvious, until Harrison remembered Elijah's words. She brought me a book. Said she thought I might like it. Harrison found Elijah tending roses behind the school, the late October sun warming his back as he carefully pruned dead blooms. The book Rebecca gave you, Harrison said without preamble. Do you still have it? Elijah straightened slowly. Been wondering when you'd come asking about that. Yes, I still have it. Keep it in my special collection. In Elijah's small house on the edge of town, a bookshelf held perhaps 24 volumes, each one clearly treasured, carefully maintained. He pulled To Kill a Mockingbird from the shelf and handed it to Harrison. Never found anything in it, Elijah said. Read it cover to cover 3 times, looking for some message from her. Nothing. Harrison opened the book, flipping through pages, feeling along the spine, examining the binding. Nothing seemed unusual until he noticed the end papers, the decorative pages glued to the inside of the hardcover. The back one was slightly bubbled, as if it had gotten wet and dried improperly, or as if something had been hidden beneath it. Using his pocket knife, Harrison carefully loosened the edge of the end paper. Beneath it, pressed flat against the hardcover, was an envelope addressed simply, "In case of emergency." Inside was a letter and a small black and white photograph. To whom it may concern, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I've been working with a small group of teachers and parents to ensure Montgomery County complies with federal integration orders. We've faced significant resistance from the school board, particularly from Senator Richard Caldwell and Judge Walter Simmons. Judge Simmons has been especially concerning. What began as professional meetings to discuss legal implications of integration has become something else entirely. He has made advances that I've rejected. He has made threats veiled as advice. And recently I discovered something that makes me fear for my safety. Simmons has been systematically blocking integration efforts while presenting himself publicly as moderate. He has connections to local groups opposing civil rights legislation, and he has used his position to silence others who have stood against him. The enclosed photograph was taken at a private meeting of these individuals. I should not have been there. I should not have seen what I saw. But now that I have, I cannot unsee it. If anything happens to me, look to Walter Simmons. Rebecca Carter. The photograph showed a group of men in what appeared to be a hunting lodge. At the center stood a distinguished man in his 50s, Judge Walter Simmons, now State Senator Simmons. Beside him was Senator Caldwell. They were shaking hands with robed figures whose faces were partially visible despite their hoods. Harrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. "Do you know what this means?" he asked Elijah. The older man nodded grimly. "Means Miss Rebecca stumbled into something a lot bigger and uglier than school integration. Means she found out who was really pulling the strings in Montgomery County." "Have you figured it out yet? What Rebecca discovered that cost her her life? What powerful men would do to protect not just segregation, but their secret affiliations with groups known for violence and intimidation?" As Harrison dug deeper, the case took an even darker turn. Medical records from Rebecca's last checkup in October 1968, records that had somehow been overlooked in the original investigation, revealed something shocking. Rebecca Carter had been approximately 8 weeks pregnant when she disappeared. The revelation hit Harrison like a physical blow. Not just murder, but potentially 2 lives taken, and a motive that suddenly became much clearer. "Did you know?" he asked Dorothy during their next meeting. She couldn't meet his eyes. "I suspected. She'd been sick in the mornings, emotional, but she never confirmed it." "Any idea who the father might have been?" Dorothy's hands trembled as she lit a cigarette. "I always assumed it was Henry Caldwell. They'd been friendly at church functions, but now with that journal, I don't know." Harrison spread the journal entries, the letter and the photograph on Dorothy's kitchen table. "Your sister was brave. She was fighting for something she believed in, and she stumbled onto corruption at the highest levels of county government. And it got her killed," Dorothy whispered. "I need your help," Harrison said. "I need to build a case against Walter Simmons, but I'll be fighting the entire power structure of this county. It won't be easy, and it could be dangerous." Dorothy stared at the photograph of her sister's likely killers. "What do you need me to do?" The investigation accelerated. Harrison tracked down financial records showing Rebecca had received 3 payments of $500 each from an anonymous source in the months before her disappearance. He discovered Walter Simmons had been the judge who signed off on Sheriff Walsh's promotion to Chief Judge of the County Court in 1969, a position Walsh had held until his death in 1971. Most damning of all, Harrison found records of a hunting cabin owned by Simmons, less than a mile from where Rebecca's remains were discovered. But as Harrison closed in on the truth, resistance mounted. Sheriff Peterson called him to his office one morning, expression grave. "I'm getting pressure from upstairs," Peterson said, not meeting Harrison's eyes. "State Senator Simmons called the governor personally. Says you're harassing him with baseless accusations about a case that's been cold for 5 years. I have evidence. I don't want to hear about your evidence." Peterson slammed his hand on the desk. "This ends now. You're off the case. Go back to the state capitol and find some other crusade." Harrison stood his ground. Rebecca Carter deserves justice. Rebecca Carter is dead and buried. Let her rest in peace. That night, Harrison returned to his motel room to find it ransacked. His case notes were gone. The photograph from the book was missing. Even Rebecca's journal had been taken. As he surveyed the damage, the phone rang. "Drop it," a voice said without introduction. "For your own good. For Dorothy Carter's good." Some secrets should stay buried. The line went dead. What would you do? Walk away from a case where every power structure is aligned against you, where evidence disappears and threats materialize from shadows, where a young woman's murder has been successfully covered up for 5 years. For Harrison, the answer came in the form of a brick thrown through his car window the next morning. Attached was a note: "Leave or the sister is next." They had made a critical mistake. They had made it personal. Harrison drove immediately to Dorothy's apartment in Birmingham, only to find her door ajar, her living room in disarray. For one terrible moment, he thought he'd failed her too. Then he heard movement from the bedroom. Drawing his gun, he approached cautiously. Dorothy emerged, a suitcase in hand, her face tear-streaked but determined. "They called," she said. "Told me what would happen if you didn't drop the case." Harrison holstered his weapon. "I'll request protection for you. We can—" "No," Dorothy's voice was steel. "I'm not running. I'm not hiding. For 5 years I've lived with not knowing, with wondering if I could have saved her somehow. I won't live with that anymore." She opened the suitcase on her bed. Inside wasn't clothing, but files, newspaper clippings, letters, photographs. "After you left yesterday, I called some of Rebecca's former colleagues, teachers who left Montgomery after integration finally happened. They've been keeping their own records, their own suspicions about what happened to Becca." Harrison leafed through the materials, evidence of systematic obstruction of integration efforts, testimonies from teachers who'd been threatened or forced out, financial records showing suspicious payments to county officials. "This is incredible," he breathed. "There's more," Dorothy said. "One of the teachers, Martha Wilkins, she remembered something about that night at the Jenkins farm. She said she saw Rebecca talking to Walter Simmons outside, near the barn. Said they seemed to be arguing. Simmons grabbed Rebecca's arm, and she pulled away. Why didn't she come forward before? She did. Told Sheriff Walsh the next day. He said he'd look into it. Then 2 days later, her husband was pulled over for drunk driving. Except he doesn't drink. Lost his job at the bank. Got the message loud and clear." Harrison gathered the materials carefully. "This helps, but we still need hard evidence connecting Simmons to Rebecca's death, something that places him with her that night, or at the burial site." Dorothy zipped the suitcase closed. "Then we'll find it, together." As they prepared to leave, Harrison's attention was caught by a photograph on Dorothy's dresser, the only one in the apartment that showed Rebecca. The sisters stood together at Lake Martin, arms around each other, laughing in the summer sun. Rebecca wore a distinctive locket around her neck. "That necklace," Harrison said. "Did they find it with her remains?" Dorothy touched the photograph. "No, it was our mother's. Becca wore it every day after Mom died. It should have been with her." Harrison stared at the locket, an idea forming. Unless someone took it. As a trophy. The walls were closing in. Harrison and Dorothy had assembled compelling circumstantial evidence, but nothing that would definitively tie Walter Simmons to Rebecca's murder. Nothing that would overcome his power, his connections, his veneer of respectability. Then came the attack on Elijah Washington. Harrison found him in the hospital, face bruised, ribs taped, right arm in a cast. 2 men had jumped him as he walked home from the school. They'd mentioned nothing about Rebecca or the investigation. They didn't need to. The message was clear. "They think they can scare me," Elijah said, wincing as he shifted in the hospital bed. "Been scared my whole life in Alabama. Doesn't mean I ever stop doing what's right." From his good hand, he passed Harrison a small key. "Safety deposit box at First National, number 447. Been paying the fees for 5 years, waiting for someone to ask the right questions." Inside the box, Harrison found a cassette tape labeled simply RC, Nov 15, 1968. "Rebecca came to see me the day before she disappeared," Elijah explained when Harrison returned to the hospital. "Asked to borrow my tape recorder. Said she was meeting someone who might say things she needed to remember exactly." Harrison stared at the small cassette. She recorded her conversation with Simmons. "Don't know if she ever got the chance to use it. Found the recorder in my mailbox 3 days after she went missing. Tape still inside. Never listened to it. Too afraid of what I might hear. Too afraid of what might happen if anyone knew I had it. That night, in a motel room 30 miles outside Montgomery, Harrison and Dorothy listened to the tape on a portable player Harrison had purchased specifically for this purpose. The recording was of poor quality, with significant background noise, but the voices were clear enough. "You can't keep blocking this, Walter. The federal courts have ruled. Integration is happening whether you like it or not." Rebecca's voice was firm, professional. "There are ways to comply with the letter of the law while maintaining certain separations. It's been done all over the South." Simmons sounded reasonable, measured, a man discussing a political disagreement, not a moral one. "That's not good enough. These children deserve equal education, equal opportunity." "You're being naive, Rebecca. Some things are simply the natural order. You can't legislate them away." "Is that what you tell yourself to justify what I saw at the lodge? To justify the robes, the threats, the cross-burnings?" A pause. When Simmons spoke again, his tone had changed completely. "You shouldn't have been there. You shouldn't have seen that." "But I did, and I have the photograph to prove it." "Who else knows? Enough people that silencing me won't help you." Another pause, longer this time. "You know, I've always admired your passion, Rebecca. Your conviction. We could work together on this, find a compromise that satisfies everyone." "There is no compromise on basic human dignity." "There's something else we need to discuss. Your condition." Rebecca's sharp intake of breath was audible. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please, small towns have few secrets. Dr. Mitchell is an old friend. He mentioned your visit, your symptoms. That's a violation of—" "The child is mine, isn't it?" The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. "Meet me tomorrow night after the Jenkins Farm social. We can discuss this privately. Come to my hunting cabin. No one needs to know about any of this, the photograph, the baby, any of it. We can find a solution that works for everyone." The recording ended abruptly. Harrison and Dorothy sat in stunned silence. Finally, Dorothy whispered, "Walter Simmons." Walter Simmons was the father. Harrison nodded grimly, and he lured her to his cabin that night, not to discuss solutions, but to silence her permanently. "We have him," Dorothy said, eyes shining with unshed tears. "We finally have him." But Harrison's expression remained troubled. "We have his voice discussing the pregnancy and the photograph. We have him arranging to meet her the night she disappeared, but we don't have a confession. We don't have proof he killed her. What more do we need?" "Something that places him with Rebecca after she left the Jenkins farm. Something that connects him directly to her death." Dorothy stared at the cassette player. "The locket, her locket that was never found." Harrison nodded slowly. "Trophies. Killers often keep trophies." The next day, State Senator Walter Simmons hosted a fundraising gala at his Montgomery mansion. At 60 years old, he was at the height of his power, mentioned as a potential gubernatorial candidate, respected across Alabama for his traditional values and commitment to states' rights. He moved through the crowd of supporters with practiced ease, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, the very picture of Southern gentility. He never noticed the woman in a blue dress who slipped away from the main reception, moving deeper into the private areas of the house. Dorothy Carter had never imagined she would stand in her sister's killer's bedroom, searching through his personal belongings while a political fundraiser continued downstairs. But grief and rage make people capable of things they never thought possible. She found nothing in the obvious places, no locket in jewelry boxes or dresser drawers, no photograph hidden in books, no cassette tapes in his desk. As she prepared to admit defeat, her attention was caught by a small key cabinet mounted on the wall. Inside were labeled keys, boat, lake house, office, and one labeled simply lodge, the hunting lodge where Rebecca had seen Simmons with robed figures, the hunting lodge near where her body had been found. Dorothy pocketed the key and slipped back downstairs, rejoining the party just as Harrison, posing as a political reporter, was finishing his interview with Simmons. "One last question, Senator," Harrison said, recorder running openly on the table between them. What are your thoughts on the recent discovery of Rebecca Carter's remains? I understand you knew her. Simmons's expression never faltered. A tragedy. She was a dedicated teacher. The community lost a bright light when she disappeared. There are rumors the case is being reopened, that new evidence has emerged. After 5 years, seems unlikely anything of value could surface now. Simmons smiled thinly. Some mysteries simply remain unsolved. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other guests to attend to. As Simmons moved away, a woman approached Harrison, elegant, silver-haired, with eyes that had witnessed decades of calculated compromise. Mrs. Simmons, Harrison acknowledged, thank you for hosting this evening. Eleanor Simmons glanced toward her husband, now deep in conversation with a state representative. You're not really a reporter, are you? You're the detective, the one asking questions about Rebecca Carter. Harrison tensed. I'm investigating her death, yes. Walk with me, she said quietly. Out to the garden. What I have to say isn't for public consumption. In the carefully manicured garden behind the mansion, Eleanor Simmons lit a cigarette with trembling hands. 40 years of marriage teaches you things about a man, things he thinks you don't see, things he thinks you're too proper to acknowledge. Mrs. Simmons, Walter has always had indiscretions. I accepted that as the price of our position, but Rebecca Carter was different. He became obsessed with her. When she rejected him, it changed him. Harrison watched her carefully. Did you know about the pregnancy? Eleanor's laugh was brittle. Of course I knew, just as I knew when he came home late that November night, smelling of pine and dirt, with mud on his shoes and a look in his eyes I'd never seen before. Did he tell you what happened? He didn't need to. The next morning I found a black shoe in his car, a woman's flat, left foot. She drew deeply on her cigarette. And later, when he thought I was asleep, I saw him hide something in his study. A locket. I recognized it from seeing Rebecca wear it at church. Harrison's heart raced. Do you know where these items are now? Eleanor Simmons stared into the darkness beyond the garden lights. The shoe is gone, burned in the fireplace that same week, but the locket... She reached into her purse and withdrew a small velvet pouch. Some secrets are too heavy to carry forever, detective, even for a politician's wife. Inside the pouch was Rebecca's locket, the one from the photograph, the one she'd worn every day after her mother's death. When Harrison opened it, he found a tiny photograph inside, Rebecca and Dorothy as children, smiling in the sunlight of a different world. Why now? Harrison asked. After 5 years of silence. Eleanor Simmons extinguished her cigarette against a stone planter. Because I have cancer, detective. 6 months to live at most. And I've made my peace with many things. But not with this. Not with knowing what he did to that girl and her baby. Not with knowing I protected a monster for the sake of appearances. She turned to face him fully. Walter will be at the hunting lodge tomorrow morning. Alone. He goes there the first Saturday of every month to reminisce. You'll find what you need there. What you need to end this. As she walked back toward the house, she paused. Detective, make it count. Make it matter. For her. For all of them. What would you risk for justice? Your career. Your safety. Your life. As Harrison and Dorothy drove toward Walter Simmons's hunting lodge the next morning, these questions hung between them. They had the recording. They had the locket. They had Eleanor Simmons's testimony. But would it be enough against a man who had successfully buried the truth for 5 years? The lodge stood in a clearing surrounded by pine trees, rustic, isolated, the perfect place to hide secrets. Simmons's car was already parked outside. Stay here, Harrison told Dorothy. If anything happens, if I'm not back in 30 minutes, drive to the state police headquarters in Montgomery. Give them everything we have. Be careful, Dorothy whispered. Becca would never forgive me if I lost you too. Harrison approached the cabin cautiously, gun drawn. Through the window, he could see Walter Simmons sitting in an armchair drinking whiskey despite the early hour, staring at something in his hands. Harrison knocked. Senator Simmons, State Police. I'd like to ask you some questions. "Doors open, Detective Harrison. I've been expecting you." Inside, the lodge was a shrine to masculine pursuits, hunting trophies on the walls, leather furniture, a stone fireplace. Simmons hadn't moved from his chair, the tumbler of whiskey balanced on the armrest. "My wife called me last night," he said conversationally. "Told me what she'd done, what she'd given you." He held up what he'd been looking at, a small key. "She didn't know about this, though. The real trophy." "Stand up slowly," Harrison ordered. "Hands where I can see them." Simmons complied with the casual confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "You know, I actually liked Rebecca. Respected her even, her conviction, her principles. In another world, another time. You murdered her. I offered her solutions, compromises, money for her and the child to start fresh somewhere else. A quiet divorce from Eleanor, but Rebecca wouldn't compromise, wouldn't see reason." Simmons sipped his whiskey. "Some people force your hand, Detective. They leave you no choice." "You always have a choice." "Do you? Really?" Simmons gestured around the lodge. "Look at what I've built, the influence I wield, the good I've done for this state. All of it at risk because one idealistic schoolteacher couldn't accept the natural order of things." He set down his glass and held out the key. "Under the floorboards, beneath the bearskin rug. You'll find what you're looking for there, what you need to close your case." Harrison kept his gun trained on Simmons as he moved toward the rug. Keeping one eye on the senator, he pulled back the heavy bearskin to reveal a trapdoor with a small keyhole. "The irony," Simmons said, "is that integration happened anyway. All that effort, all that unpleasantness. And in the end, the world changed despite our best efforts to preserve it." Harrison inserted the key and turned it. The trapdoor opened to reveal a small space, a hidden compartment beneath the floor. Inside was a metal box, and inside the box, wrapped in a handkerchief, was a single black shoe. A woman's flat, right foot, the match to the one found near Rebecca's car 5 years earlier. "Why keep it?" Harrison asked, rising to his feet. "Why risk keeping evidence?" Simmons smiled thinly. "You wouldn't understand. Some victories need commemoration. Walter Simmons, you're under arrest for the murder of Rebecca Carter." As Harrison began reciting the Miranda rights, movement caught his eye. Dorothy standing in the doorway, her face a mask of grief and rage as she stared at her sister's shoe in Harrison's hand. "You monster," she whispered. "She was carrying your child." Simmons's expression hardened. A complication. Nothing more. "She was a person." Dorothy's voice rose. "She was my sister. She was—" The gunshot was deafening in the confined space of the lodge. Harrison moved instinctively, tackling Dorothy to the ground, as a second shot splintered the doorframe where she had been standing. Simmons stood with a small revolver in his hand, pulled from beneath the chair cushion, while Harrison was distracted by the trap door. "I've buried this once," Simmons said calmly. "I can bury it again, along with both of you." Harrison fired twice. The first shot missed. The second caught Simmons in the shoulder, spinning him backward. The revolver clattered to the floor. As Harrison secured the weapon and handcuffed the wounded senator, Dorothy retrieved her sister's shoe from where it had fallen. "It's over," she said softly. "It's finally over." But as police sirens wailed in the distance, Harrison knew the fight was just beginning. A state senator, a prominent family, a 5-year-old murder with evidence that had been compromised, witnesses who had been silenced. The road to justice for Rebecca Carter would be long and difficult, but for the first time in 5 years, it was possible. What happens when power collides with truth? When influence meets justice? When a man who has shaped the laws of an entire state finds himself facing those same laws? As Walter Simmons was led away in handcuffs, these questions hung in the air like the last notes of a funeral hymn. The final chapter of Rebecca Carter's story was about to be written. But would it be a story of justice served or justice denied? Subscribe now to hear the conclusion of Rebecca's Mile in our next episode. We'll take you inside the sensational trial that divided Montgomery, reveal the shocking testimony that finally exposed the truth, and show you how one woman's courage, even in death, changed a community forever. Some secrets refuse to stay buried, some truths demand to be told. And Rebecca Carter's story isn't over yet. Power plus secrets minus accountability equals injustice. It's an equation as old as civilization itself. But what happens when a new variable enters that equation? What happens when truth, persistence, and courage combine to challenge the established order? The arrest of State Senator Walter Simmons sent shockwaves through Montgomery, Alabama. A respected politician, a community leader, a church-going family man, now charged with the murder of Rebecca Carter, a young schoolteacher who had disappeared 5 years earlier. Welcome to the conclusion of Rebecca's Mile on Dark Country Chronicles, Montgomery County Courthouse, January 1974. The marble halls echoed with whispers as Detective James Harrison made his way through the crowd. Reporters clustered on the courthouse steps, photographers jostled for position, and curious onlookers strained for a glimpse of the man who had brought down one of Alabama's most powerful figures. Harrison ignored them all, his focus on the slight figure waiting by the courtroom doors. Dorothy Carter, dressed in a simple navy suit, her hands clutching her sister's locket. "Are you ready for this?" Harrison asked quietly. Dorothy nodded. "I've been ready for 5 years." Inside, the courtroom was already packed. The prosecution table was occupied by District Attorney Michael Lawson, a career prosecutor known for his methodical approach. The defense table held not one, but 3 attorneys, led by Clayton Reynolds, one of the South's most prominent defense lawyers. And between them sat Walter Simmons, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his arm in a sling from Harrison's bullet, his expression one of dignified indignation, a man wrongfully accused, a public servant unfairly persecuted. Judge William Forrest entered, and the proceedings began. "The State versus Walter Edward Simmons," the clerk announced. "One count of first-degree murder in the death of Rebecca Ann Carter." As Lawson delivered his opening statement, Harrison studied the jury, 8 men, 4 women, mostly middle-aged, mostly white, people who had likely voted for Simmons or his allies, people who attended the same churches, the same social functions, the same charity galas. "The prosecution faces an uphill battle," Harrison murmured to Dorothy. "Simmons has deep connections in this community." "So did Rebecca," she replied. "She taught their children. She volunteered at their libraries. She was part of their lives in ways Simmons never was." The trial began with the prosecution establishing the timeline of Rebecca's disappearance, her last evening at the Jenkins farm, the abandoned car, the years of fruitless investigation, and finally, the discovery of her remains in 1973. Dr. Thomas Mitchell, the county medical examiner, testified about the skeletal remains. "Based on dental records, we positively identified the deceased as Rebecca Carter. Due to the condition of the remains, exact cause of death could not be determined. However, there was a fracture to the hyoid bone, here in the neck, consistent with manual strangulation." "And was the victim pregnant at the time of death?" Lawson asked. "Objection." Reynolds was on his feet. "Speculative and prejudicial." "Your Honor," Lawson countered, "the victim's medical records from October 1968 clearly indicate pregnancy. This establishes motive." Judge Forrest considered. "I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Counselor." Dr. Mitchell nodded. "Based on medical records and the presence of fetal remains, yes, Ms. Carter was approximately 8 to 10 weeks pregnant at time of death." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Simmons remained impassive, but Harrison noticed his wife Eleanor, sitting in the front row, close her eyes briefly. What makes a compelling case? Physical evidence? Witness testimony? Motive and opportunity? Or is it the accumulation of small truths that eventually reveal the larger one? As the trial progressed, Lawson methodically built his case. Former Deputy Frank Moore testified about finding Rebecca's abandoned car. Elijah Washington described his conversations with Rebecca in the days before her disappearance and the tape recorder she had borrowed. When the prosecution played the recording of Rebecca's conversation with Simmons, the courtroom fell silent. Rebecca's voice, clear, determined, principled, filled the space. And then Simmons's voice, first reasonable, then threatening, finally acknowledging the pregnancy. "The child is mine, isn't it?" Reynolds objected vigorously, arguing the tape could have been altered, that the chain of custody was compromised after 5 years, that Elijah Washington was not a credible witness due to obvious biases. But Judge Forrest allowed the recording, and Harrison saw several jurors exchange glances. The most damning testimony came from Eleanor Simmons. Despite Reynolds's attempts to prevent her from testifying against her husband, she insisted on taking the stand. "Mrs. Simmons," Lawson began gently, "how long have you been married to the defendant?" 43 years this May," she replied, her voice steady. "And on the night of November 16th, 1968, the night Rebecca Carter disappeared, do you recall your husband's whereabouts?" Eleanor's gaze drifted to her husband. "Walter told me he was attending a political meeting in Birmingham. He left around 6 that evening." "And when did he return home?" "Just after 2 in the morning. I remember because I'd been unable to sleep. I heard his car in the driveway." "Did you notice anything unusual about your husband when he returned?" Eleanor paused. "His clothes were dirty. There was mud on his shoes, and he wasn't himself." "In what way?" "He was agitated. Poured himself a large whiskey. Sat in his study until dawn." "Mrs. Simmons, did you discover anything unusual in the days following Rebecca Carter's disappearance?" "Yes." Her voice remained steady. "I found a woman's shoe in Walter's car, a black flat, left foot, and later I saw him hiding a locket in his study safe." "This locket?" Lawson held up Rebecca's necklace in an evidence bag. "Yes, I recognized it as belonging to Rebecca Carter. I'd seen her wear it at church functions." "And what did you do with this information?" Eleanor's composure finally cracked. "Nothing. I did nothing. For 5 years I did nothing." As she stepped down from the witness stand, she paused beside her husband. "I'm sorry, Walter. Not for telling the truth, for waiting so long to do it." The equation was shifting. Power and secrets were being counterbalanced by truth and testimony, but would it be enough? The defense strategy became clear as Reynolds presented his case. He didn't deny the relationship between Simmons and Rebecca. Instead, he painted it as a consensual affair that Rebecca had threatened to expose. "Senator Simmons made a mistake," Reynolds told the jury, "a personal failing for which he has asked forgiveness from his wife and his God, but that doesn't make him a murderer. He attacked the evidence, the recording could have been edited, the locket could have been given as a gift, the shoe could have been planted. He questioned Harrison's methods, suggesting a vendetta against a prominent public figure, and he introduced a surprise witness, Henry Caldwell, son of Senator Richard Caldwell." "Mr. Caldwell," Reynolds began, "what was your relationship with Rebecca Carter?" Henry, now 30 and working in his father's business, shifted uncomfortably. "We were friends. We attended the same church." "Were you romantically involved with Ms. Carter?" "We went on a few dates in the summer of 1968. "And did Ms. Carter ever discuss her political activities with you? Her involvement in school integration efforts?" "Yes, she was passionate about it, sometimes recklessly so." "Reckless how?" "She attended meetings she wasn't invited to, took photographs, threatened to expose people who opposed her views." "Including your father?" "Yes. She told me she had evidence that could ruin him, that could ruin several prominent men in Montgomery." "And how did that make you feel, Mr. Caldwell?" Henry stared at his hands. "Angry, protective of my family." "Angry enough to confront her?" "Objection." Lawson was on his feet. "Counsel is leading his own witness toward an alternative theory without foundation." "Sustained," Judge Forrest ruled. "Mr. Reynolds, confine yourself to facts, not implications." But the damage was done. Reynolds had introduced reasonable doubt, another man with motive, another explanation for Rebecca's interest in powerful men's activities. As Henry Caldwell stepped down, Harrison leaned toward Dorothy. "He's lying. The timeline doesn't match what Rebecca wrote in her journal." "Can you prove it?" Harrison shook his head. "Not directly, but I have an idea." The prosecution's rebuttal began with a surprise witness of their own, Martha Wilkins, the teacher who had seen Rebecca arguing with Simmons at the Jenkins farm. "I saw them outside near the barn," she testified. It was around 9:30. They seemed to be arguing. Senator Simmons grabbed Rebecca's arm, and she pulled away. "Did you report this to authorities?" Lawson asked. "Yes, I told Sheriff Walsh the next day. He said he'd look into it." "And what happened after that?" Martha's expression hardened. 2 days later, my husband was pulled over for drunk driving. Except he doesn't drink. He lost his job at the bank. We got the message." Reynolds cross-examined her aggressively, suggesting her memory was faulty after 5 years, implying she had a political agenda against Simmons. But Martha remained composed, her testimony unshaken. The final prosecution witness was Harrison himself. He described finding Rebecca's journal, the photograph of Simmons with robed figures, the recording, and finally the confrontation at the hunting lodge where he discovered the matching shoe. "Detective Harrison," Lawson asked, "in your professional opinion, based on all the evidence you've gathered, who killed Rebecca Carter?" Harrison looked directly at Simmons. "Walter Simmons lured Rebecca to his hunting lodge on the night of November 16, 1968. When she refused to end her pregnancy and keep quiet about what she knew, he strangled her and buried her body in the woods nearby." "Objection!" Reynolds shouted. "Speculative. Sustained," Judge Forrest ruled. "The jury will disregard the detective's conclusion." But Harrison had planted the seed, a coherent narrative that explained all the evidence, all the connections, all the cover-ups that had protected Simmons for 5 years. When it came time for Reynolds to cross-examine Harrison, he focused on one key point. "Detective, did you personally witness Walter Simmons kill Rebecca Carter?" "No." "Did anyone witness this alleged murder?" "No." "So your entire case is built on circumstantial evidence and conjecture?" Harrison met his gaze steadily. "My case is built on physical evidence, witness testimony, the defendant's own recorded words, and a 5-year pattern of obstruction and cover-up." Reynolds smiled thinly. "No further questions."